Maybe we can begin where with all the thoughts that Snowlin has so beautifully articulated. Um, as Snowlin was emphasizing, reconciliation is not a matter of unconditional forgiveness. As the name of the committee itself says, it's Truth and Reconciliation Committee. It's a matter of justice, it's a matter of voices being heard, of wrongs of the past being addressed, of a roadmap for the future, and about justice for the coming generations. So when people present their cries, their hurts, it is not just for their time, but they also want to be good ancestors. They want to right the wrongs so that the future generations can have a better life. So I there were two reasons for which I asked Nolan to go first. One is so that I can connect with the reconciliation movement, which began in South Africa, and the Australian reconciliation movement in Africa, the anti-apartheid movement. The word reconciliation itself has come through the works of Desmond Tutu and Nelson Mandela. I'll just take you quickly through a timeline for those who are new to Australian studies. And the timeline is tailored specifically to Aboriginal history, to Black history. So, as we know, 1901, the Federation was formed, and the Constitution clearly states that Aboriginal natives shall not be counted. So, this statement is very significant because as we see down the line, Aboriginal people were not even considered as human beings, right? And um, in 1938, there was this expression of protest. There was an Aboriginal conference where they observed the 26th of January, which is incidentally the the Australia Day. It's called Australia Day, and the way we have our Republic Day, it is considered the founding day and the arrival of the first fleet. So this day, the arrival of the first fleet in Australia is celebrated, and they observed it as a day of mourning. And among all the other injustices that have been fought through representation. So I'm bringing this timeline to you to show that time and again there has been truth telling. So there was this in Warburton Ranges, there was this controversy, and it is documented. A commission was sent there, and they documented the poor condition of the people, the health condition, the conditions in which they lived, the mining that was being done, the nuclear testing projects that had been started in that place, and how these people were deserving of a better life. And there's a petition that was presented to the government in Arnhem Land. See, Arnhem Land is a mine of wealth. It's a mining territory, and it's at the northern tip of Australia. So it's a place that is you have a large percentage of Australian indigenous people, but the land is taken over for mining purposes. So there again, there has been a petition presented to the government saying that they are the traditional owners of the land and their land is being exploited by the government. One second, there are people wanting to join the call. I don't think I'll be able to admit anyone after this. I have to focus on my presentation. Uh, and then you have the freedom bus ride. So inspired by what was happening in America, the 1960s was a time of civil rights movement in America. Martin Luther King, uh, the educated people, there's of the educated Aboriginal people. So we have a group of people who were in the Melbourne Law School and sympathizers with the Aboriginal cause. Even white people joined them, and they took this bus and went through different states in Australia, raising awareness about the Aboriginal cause, the discrimination, the ill treatment, and the rights that were not given to Aborigines. Wave Hill is also one place where the Aboriginal people who were working, they walked off the Wave Hill in protest of their for the discrimination and then poor wages and things like that. And then referendum was a very important event in Australian history, because that was a time where there was activism by the Aboriginal people, there was consciousness raising, and there was a general movement all over Australia, a political, social movement for the recognition of the Aboriginal people as citizens of the country. So Australia is different from India in terms of the laws. So each state had its laws. So even prior to 1967, it has been documented that Aboriginal people can vote, but it was not brought into the constitution as such. So there was a referendum seeking the right to vote, and they should be counted as a part of the population. So there was a overwhelming response, and the majority of the population voted for the Aboriginal people being considered, counted as the citizens of the country. So there's an oft quoted expression saying that till 1967 they were only regarded as the flora and fauna. They were not even regarded as human beings. In 1972, they erected something called a tent embassy. So this is an expression of sovereignty. I have been to all these places. I'm sorry, I didn't put together photographs, but this tent embassy was erected right opposite the Parliament in Canberra. Now it's the old Parliament. They have a new Parliament building. So in 1972, they had tents put up, and they called it the Aboriginal Embassy. And mind you, this Aboriginal Embassy was recognized even by world leaders. World leaders visited this Aboriginal embassy, and from here, even they visited countries which sympathized with the Aboriginal cause. So there are life stories relating to also. That is why I'm taking you through this timeline. And this is you can see this picture of the Freedom Bus Ride. Now, 1988 is very significant because the first landing was in 1788. Captain Cook landed at Botany Bay, and when Australia was celebrating its bicentenary, there were voices of dissent, uh, especially among the Aboriginal people. Aboriginal people considered it not a time of celebration, but it was celebrating 200 years of colonization and 200 years of oppression of the Aboriginal people. And so they called for, um, there were protests, there were representations, and they called for a recognition of what has been done to the Aboriginal people. I'll just admit one or two people who are coming in. So now this was a time where a number of life stories were published. So if you want to look at it in parallel terms, in 1992 we had the centenary of Ambedkar's birth. Okay, so when Ambedkar's birth centenary was celebrated, Dalit organizations used that as an opportunity to draw attention to the Dalit cause. So, in the similar way, in 1988, when the bicentenary of Australia was being celebrated, there was uh, a mushrooming of stories by Aboriginal people of Aboriginal descent. In 1991, there were the a royal commission into Aboriginal deaths was appointed. This is a very significant thing because if you look at Aboriginal, the settler black confrontation, the idea of what is morally right and wrong is very different in the two cultures. And so, if a person was caught taking a sheep, a sheep off the farm, sheep farm, just to feed the community or feed his family, and he was caught doing it, he would be shot dead on the spot. But from the Aboriginal point of view, he's only taking a creature which is on the land. And with the fencing of lands that was done with the sheep farms and sheep stations being established, the right the tracks of kangaroos, of emus, and so food foraging became a problem. And therefore nomadic Aboriginal people helped themselves to feed on the farm, and this was considered a crime. Uh, and like this, there were people who were incarcerated, there were people who were killed. There is a life story, in Roberta Sykes' trilogy. She talks about how the Aboriginal activists were helping a man who was on the run from the law, hiding from the police along with his family, because he was imprisoned for stealing food from a store. So the perspective on right and wrong is very different in the Anglo-Saxon culture and in the indigenous culture. So what is considered stealing in one culture is considered is plain helping yourself to the resources the land offers. So and incarceration has also um, psychologically debilitated these people. There is one person called Mum Shirl. Her name was Shirley, but she came to be known as Mum Shirl because this Aboriginal woman did a lot of work among young Aboriginal men who were in prison. And there are stories which tell you that when people are released from prison, they when they come out of prison and they all they have is the community to receive them, and then they have nothing else to do. They go back to the life of crime. They go back to stealing cars, go back to petrol sniffing, go back to what, in from one perspective, would be petty theft, but from another perspective, from the eyes of the white man's law, would be crime. So a council into which probed into this um, was there in 1991, and in 1994 Jackie Huggins was in this council for um, Aboriginal reconciliation. So after this investigation into the into Aboriginal deaths in custody, uh, one of the recommendations was the call for reconciliation. Now, this is very important, very significant because of the polarities, okay, and the polarization between black and white. And this call for reconciliation of people meeting each other halfway was a significant turn of events. And then the next significant thing that happened is uh, there was a person named Mabo, all right? And this Mabo, he was working as a gardener in a university, and the there was a historian named Henry Reynolds, who was in James Cook University. Yeah, James Cook University, and this historian Henry Reynolds was a professor, and James Cook, this Henry Reynolds and Mabu were having a conversation one day, and there was a reference to the land as crown land, land belonging to the government. And Mabo took that very seriously. He was a Torres Strait Islander, and he said that the land cannot belong to any imperial government or the crown or to the federation. The land belongs to the indigenous people who have traditionally owned the land. So the question of who are the owners of the land became a legal debate from that point onward. And there was a case, Mabo versus Queensland. The case was argued on the doctrine of it hinged on the doctrine of terra nullius. What is terra nullius? When Captain Cook landed and hoisted the British flag, he said that the land, he made a statement that the land was uninhabited. All right. So even though the indigenous people's presence is recorded through so many narratives, they have been invisible. Okay, socially, politically, culturally rendered invisible. The land is empty, barren land occupied by white settlers. So, this doctrine of terra nullius was overturned. So, this 1992 is a very, very important land history, the black history of Australia. And then, so you can see that there is slowly of wrongs, addressing the grievances of the Black Australian people, the Indigenous people, the First Nations people, as we call them. And then the Native Title Act was passed, and there was the first national week for prayer for reconciliation. And there is one week in the year called NIDOC Week. I think it's celebrated in September. Every year, a week is celebrated to commemorate reconciliation and to take forward the cause of reconciliation. Now, what the Native Title Act, as I told you, is was passed after the High Court judgment of 1992, and native title is um, a legal recognition of the traditional owners of the land. All right. So at this point, I just want to make a difference between land rights and native title. So when land rights is also something that the Aboriginal people were asking for. For instance, if an Aboriginal community is living in a certain place and the government is conducting some nuclear testing program, or they have some project and they take their land, they can ask for compensation. They can claim that that is traditional land. So claiming that a land is traditional land and they have generations of connection to that land is the native title process. Land rights, the land is need not does not require proving that they are the traditional owners. They could ask for land to be used for fishing or to have their own farm or whatever. So this Native Title Act again is about Aboriginal sovereignty, as you can see. Then they also have their own flag, which is very much like our Dravidian yellow sun in the middle, red and black. So the Aboriginal flag, the flag of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders is recognized by the government. And then the work of reconciliation continues through the Council for Reconciliation. 1997 is again a significant year because there was an inquiry again into the stolen generations. And the committee appointed for this, the Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Committee, HREOC, Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Committee, they presented the report to the Prime Minister of the time, Mr. John Howard. And this was a document that has changed the course of history for Australian people, helped them to be heard and to make some kind of reparation for the losses that they've had. Now, this report is interesting and it is significant with relation to what we are reflecting on this evening about how stories, life stories, narratives, testimonies play a very important role in bringing in truth telling, in the establishment of justice, peace, and reconciliation. I'll just admit one or two people who are trying to come in. So I was talking to you about the Bringing Them Home report. The interesting thing about this report is that people who had experienced separation from their families, institutionalization, you must be aware of what we mean by the term the stolen generation. For those who are not aware, the stolen generation is a term used to refer to Aboriginal people, and this has happened to almost all Aboriginal people. There are no Aboriginal people who don't have a story of removal. All right, they were removed from their traditional lands, removed from the camps in which they lived, and they were institutionalized. So if there was a family of three children, three children each would have been put in a different institution, even at the age of 5 or 6 or 7. And from that institution, they are sent out into the world. The boys would be sent into some trade, the girls into tailoring, housekeeping. Basically they went as housemaids, and there again, as housemaids, they would be impregnated by some man in that white family, the master or his son. And again, the pregnant Aboriginal woman would be taken to the hospital. At the time of birth, the child is taken away from her, and she has no idea where that child is institutionalized. So the stories of these people who experienced this trauma of being separated from the parent even at childbirth, or being taken from the camps in which they lived by the police and being placed in different institutions, these people are called the stolen generation. So these stories of the stolen generation were recorded in the Bringing Them Home report. So this commission, the Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Commission, they opened up their doors to people who could just come and tell them their stories. So people witnessed about the trauma they had endured, about they shared their memories of removal, of institutionalization, of the things that happened to them. And interestingly, when stories matched or connected, these were people who were removed were often able to find their lost family, okay, able to connect with siblings from whom they were separated, parents from whom they were separated. So the Bringing Them Home report played a crucial role in healing the hurt. It played a crucial role in healing the hurt. And in 2000, also known as the year Y2K, all the efforts towards reconciliation uh, reached another high with people symbolically, people of Aboriginal descent and white settlers, symbolically expressing love, forgiveness, acceptance by walking the bridge. So you know that Harbor Bridge is an iconic bridge is one of the monuments of Australia. It's iconic, and so there were people walking across from either end of the bridge as a token of reconciliation. And this kind of walking across bridges was happening all over Australia to symbolize that they were reaching out to each other. And as you see, there are more reports, more investigations, more opportunities for voices to be heard. And in 2006, there was a Close the Gap campaign for Indigenous health equality. Now, terms like close the gap, reconciliation, another term is treaty. See, one of the grievances that Australian people have is that the land was taken away without a treaty. On the other hand, if you look at the history of Maori people in New Zealand, they have the Treaty of Waitangi. Even that is no justification, because they, you know, uh, the culture of literacy that the white people have and of documentation on paper is not known to the indigenous people. So when they signed the treaty, the Maori people signed the treaty, they didn't know what they were signing even. But even that was not there in Australia. So they were asking for a treaty. They were asking for a recognition of the land being taken over and through a treaty. So when in and 2007 was a kind of, they had a kind of setback to this reconciliation process, with the Prime Minister John Howard refusing to say sorry. All right, that was the 40th anniversary of the referendum, and there was a demand from the Aboriginal people, Aboriginal groups, to for the Prime Minister to apologize. He refused to apologize. And 2008, Rudd came to power, the Labour Party came to power, and one of the promises that he made was that he will apologize to the Aboriginal people. Now, you must also understand that uh, in Australia, it has for a long time been just two parties, the way it is in the UK and America, and it's in Australia, two-party thing. But now you have a few more parties like the Greens and two or three more parties. So the major parties there are the Liberal and Labour. Labour is more sympathetic to the working class Aboriginal people. And even in 1971, Gough Whitlam came to power as a Labour leader. He was supported to a great extent by the Aboriginal people because he promised justice to them. Similarly, in 2008, Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, he apologized to when he came to power. He apologized, and this was a landmark event. Um, so further down the line, we another event that we have to note is in 2017. Uh, they met at Uluru, the Uluru where you have that red rock called Ayers Rock in central Australia, the desert. There was a meeting there, and they released a statement, Uluru Statement from the Heart. They were again reiterating that what they want is treaty, truth. They want their voices to be heard. And one of the things that developed from this Uluru Statement from the Heart, and which evolved to closer to 2023, is the referendum on voice to parliament. All right. Now, this referendum on voice to parliament is a demand for all matters pertaining to Aboriginal people. Now, this is a very important thing because, as you know, Australia is a huge continent and natural resources are great. Uranium, okay, coal, and bauxite, right, near the Gulf of Carpentaria. Huge very rich in these natural resources, and in these remote places where mining takes place, you have the communities living there. And it's a stark contrast because the communities are impoverished and the companies which are coming in there for mining are minting money, making huge profits. So they do give, well, because of representation, there has been, and because of the Title Act, there has been compensation. But there are many projects, government projects, which are not screened by the Aboriginal communities. So it could be a fishing project, it could be the use of their rivers, it could be the use of their land, it could be even the use of even research for that instance, for in that case, going into communities and doing research on the people. Everything should have the protective uh, filter by the community elders, by the community people themselves. So this is what they are asking at a larger level, from the grassroots level to the level of parliament. They're asking for their voices to be heard, and to ensure that nothing goes, no bill is passed, and anything that would be detrimental to the communities living in different parts of Australia will be uh, noticed, and necessary action will be taken. So you can, also like to reiterate that the communities are small, the land is big, and the communities are in remote places. So it is very important that they are not, no one rides roughshod over them, they are not trampled, because they are in places where they are they seem to be insignificant. And here you see a transnational connection in 2020. Many Australians participated in the Black Lives Matter marches. So the Black Lives Matter movement began in the USA, and here uh, the same thing is taken up in Australia. So this identity as black Australian is also a political identity. So, Aboriginal, First Nations, these are all terms by which they assert their identity. And black Australian is something that helps them to make that connection across continents between Australia and America. All right, to connect with people who've had similar experience of dispossession. So I will explain what it is. So now these are some of the books. These are some of the life stories where you can see the how stories have been shared. Stories have been influential in policy making, in change policy in relation to Aboriginal sovereignty. There's this the second book of in this list, Margaret Tucker's If Everyone Cared, though written before the bicentennial. As I said, there was a lot of activism. A lot of narratives came out after 1988, 1987, 88. But a few were there before that. And you can also connect all these narratives like Charlie Perkins, A Bastard Like Me, can be connected to he was also a person connected to the Freedom Ride of 1965. And Margaret Tucker's If Everyone Cared, she also talks a lot about reconciliation. She was she also is a person of the stolen generation. She worked as a housemaid. She was ill treated by her mistress. I can give you one instance of how she was ill treated. Her mistress was angry with her about some work that was from her standards not done properly, and she smeared the child's used diaper on her face. So this is the level of dehumanization. And Margaret Tucker, she narrates all that she went through, but with opportunities post civil rights movements and civil rights, which helped them to gain a voice. She speaks about reconciliation. And she connected with indigenous people in America, Native American people. She attended a conference there. And she says that she went to an island in America. A Native American chief, an ancestor almost, had prophesied that people of all nations would come to that island and one day talk about peace. And Margaret Tucker in her book says that black and white should coexist peacefully. And she gives you a metaphor for that. She says they are like the black and white keys of a piano, both required to make harmonious music. Now, Sally Morgan's My Place was something that drew the attention of white people to the Aboriginal experience. It was, you can't say, it was, the sales of the book was astronomical, you can say, because it was well timed. It was timed with the bicentennial celebrations. And it recorded about half a million copies were sold. So generally, if you most white people would quote from Sally Morgan's My Place, or would say that they were familiar with Aboriginal experience because they had read Sally Morgan's My Place. And as I was talking to you about the Human Rights and Equal Opportunity Commission and how life stories. So 1989, Coral Edwards and Peter Reed came up with a collection of 13 narratives. Now, this person, Peter Reed, he was also involved with the with an organization called Link Up NS New South Wales, Link Up New South Wales, which is again part of the human rights and which is also connected to the Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Commission. Up New South was connecting people of the stolen generation. So people could come in, tell their stories, and Link Up NSW would help them to find lost family, brothers, sisters, parents, okay, members of the community from whom they were separated because of the forceful separation of children being taken forcefully from communities and institutionalized. So, one person whose narrative is in this collection, The Lost Children, his name is Paul Berendt. Now, Paul Berendt was separated from his siblings, right? And his story is here. I'll come to why I'm emphasizing Paul Berendt. And then you see there's another lady called Roberta Sykes, who was one of the first Aboriginal women, who was the first Aboriginal woman to receive a scholarship to study in Harvard. And there she connected with Black Americans, with Native Americans. And her life story is in three volumes, a trilogy. So you can see Snake Cradle, Snake Dreaming, Snake Circus. It's the snake features because she considers the snake her totem. But there is a controversy surrounding Roberta Sykes because her ancestry is African American. It was proved because she did not know who her father was. She says that she did not know who her father was. Her mother was about her biological father away from her, and she grew up thinking she was Aboriginal. So anyhow, this Roberta Sykes, she was very involved in the this Roberta Sykes was raped by 9 white men, and coming out of that trauma, she found healing. She found herself only by identifying with black people. Her mother was a white woman, very similar to the Obama story. The father is black and the mother is white, but the child is so. This Roberta Sykes, she was very active in all that activism around the tent embassy. You remember I told you about the tent embassy where they declared that they are a nation, that they are the First Nations by erecting tents right opposite the parliament and putting up a board Aboriginal Tent Embassy. So Roberta Sykes was part of the tent embassy activism, and she went to Harvard for her PhD. Then we have Ruby Langford's Don't Take Your. Now, I want to talk to you about another book, Auntie Rita. You can see it's published in 1994, and it's written by Jackie Huggins and her mother, Auntie Rita. A very interesting book because Jackie Huggins is university educated. She started writing her mother's story, and then someone told her it sounds too academic. It is not your mother's voice. So then, what the publisher, the editor, decided was that they can have the story in two different fonts. Okay, one a regular font for her mother's voice, and for Jackie's voice in italics. So the text has the voice of the mother and the daughter. So that book is called Auntie Rita because in communities they address the elders as uncle and auntie very respectfully, and she was well known in the community. And um, Jackie wanted to document her mother. Jackie is a very strong advocate of reconciliation. And she says that she has uh, internalized a lot from her mother's life. Her mother was, though she had been subjected to so much discrimination, oppression. Her mother also belonged to the stolen generation. Her mother was forcefully removed from the tribal land and institutionalized. All that happened to her, and yet her mother could find it in her heart to forgive, to be at peace with herself, to make peace with her oppressors. So this is, and Jackie Huggins went on to become the chairperson for Reconciliation Australia. She served on the board as co-chair for 13 years. For 13 years, she has served the cause of reconciliation. And I happened to interview her, and she says that reconciliation is not necessarily about what hits the headlines. It could be something as simple as the death of a person in an Aboriginal community, where the white people in the neighborhood, they participate in the wake. The wake is where they they have the funeral after a couple of days, but the period of mourning, where they sit together and they share stories about the person, about the family, and they wait for all the people in the community to come. That's one thing I found about Aboriginal funerals, that it was a matter of basic duty to a community member to attend the funeral, however far away it might have been. So now this sharing that. So in this kind of wake, you would find the white neighbors participating. Now, there are also stories about uh, white people who owned lands, who owned a huge tracts of land, who gave away part of their land if the community people said that they had taken away a piece of land that was sacred land. That was now sacred land in Aboriginal culture. It's not that they have any shrines and they do some worship or something like that. You have a sacred grove. It's a sacred grove, nobody should enter that place. Or they enter that place only during a festival, and probably they take some wood from some bark or some twigs from there, and they use it as in their corroborees, in their sacred dancing and things like that. So this kind of awareness about their about and recognizing the Aboriginal communities, the Aboriginal people who are their neighbors as their neighbors in the literal sense, being very neighborly and being involved in their lives. You remember I told you about Paul Berendt, whose story is recorded in The Lost Children by Peter Reed. Now, Paul Berendt's the father of Larissa Berendt. Larissa Berendt is a leading lawyer in Australia and also a professor of law at the University of Technology, Sydney. She has written a novel called Home, and this novel is the outcome of wanting to document her father's life story. So she interviewed her father, and he didn't have much information, and she was not able to put together the pieces of information that her father could share. Then it occurred to her that she had only the bare bones, and she toyed with the idea of writing fiction, of imagining what could have happened to certain people whom he had not connected with at all, whom he couldn't find. And the interesting thing about this novel, Home, is that after she had published the novel Home, there was a person who showed this novel to his colleague and said, "She has the same name as you. You're Greg Berendt and she's Larissa Berendt. Is it possible that you're cousins? And you've told me that your father belongs to the stolen generation, that he doesn't remember that he has connection between Larissa Berendt and Greg Berendt, who, as it turned out, was her first cousin, her father's son, her father's brother's son. So this novel, you could see, connected the story of Larissa Berendt told policies of the government, the separation policies. Now, this Fiona Doyle's Whispers of this Wick Woman is a story about native title. I've already explained to you about native title. And this book is located in a place called Vipa, which is rich in bauxite. So I visited Vipa, and you'll find heaps of red mud on the coast. Okay, this is all dredge. This heap of red mud is basically bauxite. Okay, and bauxite is shipped from Vipa to different parts of the world. So mining companies from Europe, mining companies in Australia, they have established their presence. There's a company called Rio Tinto, and they have been there from the mid 60s. Now, so this girl, Fiona Doyle, she is a product of miscegenation. You know what miscegenation is? Like, miscegenation is something that has marred, that has created so much pain in Aboriginal history. So, one parent is white, one parent is colored, is black, and the product is a half caste. So, as a product of miscegenation, she was light skinned, and all the other children in the community were dark skinned. So she felt she would be teased by her peers as a bastard. And the sequel to this Whispers of this Wick Woman is a bastard's tale. So this feeling, you can even see Charlie Perkins. The title of his book is A Bastard Like Me. Children not knowing who their biological fathers are. Okay, because most often it's the woman, Aboriginal woman. In all cases, they are Aboriginal woman who's raped, who is molested by a white man, and the product is this half caste child. The half caste child is taken away by force, institutionalized. One half caste meets another half caste, and they might marry and have children. Or if it's a woman, half caste woman, she goes into service as a housemaid, and the whole cycle repeats. Uh, and Larissa titled her novel Home because um, she was talking about Australia as home. And the central character in her novel is a man called Howard. So she deliberately named him Howard. He's the white man who impregnates the servant maid, and she has these children, these half caste children who are taken away from her. Now, she deliberately called that person Howard because she was so angry with the Prime Minister John Howard for refusing to apologize and for dismissing the petition of the Aboriginal groups asking for justice for the stolen generation, because he said, oh, only 1 in 10 children were removed. Well, that figure itself, she says, is contested. But what Larissa was emphasizing is that it is not the figures that matter. It is not the statistics. It is the stories. So this is something that I have quoted from her interview with me. She says, you can make uh, the pretty argument you like legally as to why a law is wrong, but you will never convince people of its unfairness until you can tell the stories of the people who are affected by it. So truth telling and storytelling are very deeply connected, intertwined, one integral to the other. And even in writings by white settlers, people who are settlers, you may say. David Malouf is Lebanese in origin. Kate Grenville is Anglo-Saxon, and Kate Grenville says that this novel is pretty autobiographical, that she actually researched into her own family history, and it is about the first landing of a family who has been transported from London, a man who was convicted of theft. He he lands and in New South Wales, and he comes down the Hawkesbury River, and he has his own settlement there. He gets a patch of land and makes a house and a little settlement for his family. A lot of conflict between him and the Aboriginal people living there. But Kate Grenville in that novel, she keeps on reiterating. This is one line that runs through like a refrain through the narrative: give a little, take a little. So this is her message for reconciliation: give and take. All right. There is no way of undoing the arrival of the settlers, undoing the landing of Captain Cook. There's no way of generations of white settlers going back to their imperial origins. But they can see Australia as a country shared by the races which have settled there with mutual respect for each other. And David Malouf's Remembering Babylon is also a contact narrative in that sense. There's this child who has been washed ashore. He's a British child, but he's lost family in a shipwreck, and he's raised by an Aboriginal tribe. So when this Jemmy comes across a group of white settlers, he gravitates towards them, and they also recognize him as a white child, but he has lost his language. He has lost English. He doesn't know English. And when the settler, whoever is the protagonist of that story, points a gun at him to shoot him, he says, "Don't shoot. I'm a British object." He means I'm a British subject. Describes Jemmy as an in between creature. So this is actually uh, this is actually the identity of Australians. They are in between people. Okay, there is a poet named Judith Rodriguez. She's no more. She says that her generation was a generation which did not have grandparents in Australia, and they did not know who their grandparents were, because they only knew who their parents were. All right, because that is the way they arrived. Their parents arrived in Australia. So, in summing up, I would like to reinforce that what happens in one country, one nation, one continent is definitely influenced by what happens in another country. So the civil rights movement in America has had a great influence on black people all over the world, and one of the places being Australia. The Black Panthers of America, when the Australians came to know about the Black Panthers of America, they also formed a group called the Black Panthers. And as you know, in India, we have the Dalit Panthers. So you can see how this kind of transnational flow uh, information, transnational flow of uh, em- models of empowerment uh, spurs advocacy, spurs human rights movements. And as I told you, the idea of a truth and reconciliation movement came from South Africa's anti-apartheid movement. I told you about Roberta Sykes and how she went to connected with Black Americans as well as Native Americans. When she was in America, she joined the Native American people who were observing Thanksgiving Day as a day of mourning. So Thanksgiving Day is the day of the arrival of Christopher Columbus, and it is celebrated as Thanksgiving. But for the Native American group, there was observing it as a day of mourning. Then when I told you about Link Up in New South Wales and the Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Commission, and how they focused on collecting stories about people testifying, about people witnessing. And this idea they got from the Shoah Foundation. The Shoah Foundation was set up for victims of the Holocaust, people who were uh, victims of Hitler's uh, program of his plan to e- erase Jews from this world itself. So, and therefore, just as the Shoah wanted to focus on Hitler's program of genocide, they argued based on this that even what was done to Aboriginal people in Australia amounts to genocide. It is systematic and systemic erasure of people through policies, through the White Australia policy. So when Neville had had this policy to remove children from communities, he was working. He claimed that he was working towards whitening the race or bettering the race and helping the half caste survive. There is a photograph of how Neville demonstrated how if two half castes marry, they produce a quarter caste. If two quarter castes marry, they produce an octoroon. And eventually, the whole the black Australian, the Aboriginal Australian, is wiped off the face of the earth, is left to die in the bush, and the people who have been removed forcefully, only their bloodline continues, and eventually they will be as white as the other white Australians. So these sharing of stories is what has helped justice, help the cause of justice, truth, reconciliation. The key terms here are treaty, as I said, and then in the process of all these negotiations, Aboriginal groups have always reiterated that the dealings between the government and the groups seeking rights for the Aboriginal people amounts to unfinished business, that they haven't actually got justice. And Jackie Huggins herself says that, this, she may not see it in her lifetime. She's probably around 70 now. And so she says that her mother worked towards it, she has worked towards it, but they are definitely leaving a legacy of the claim for justice. So when they had the referendum, one in 1967, Aboriginal people to have a right to vote. The 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 cry, the call being given was this catchphrase: "Stand up and be counted." And there are so many reports, post reconciliation initiatives, which always have this what do you say, this request, this plea that Australia should have a shared history, that the
sinking. We need more brothers if we to make it. We need more sisters if we to save it. Are you the one who's gonna stand up and be counted? Are you the one who's gonna be there when we shout it? Helping hand. This family plan. Stand up, stand up and be counted. Stand up and be counted. Are you the one who's always ready with a helping hand? Are you the one who understands this family plan?
So, thank you. I'd leave you with those lines from Stand Up and Be Counted. It doesn't matter which religion, which place, all it matters if you want to stand up and be counted. Whether you're white, black, doesn't matter. And it is a shared history that they are appealing for. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. We have come to the end of this session. I deem it an honor to propose the vote of thanks. I thank our keynote speaker, Dr.
Mahalakshmi, give them time for questions or something. Any questions? Observations about Snowlin's presentation? Any connections you've seen the whole thing? Any queries, any about further research? Okay, I think you can carry on with the vote of thanks. There's no response.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. We have come to the end of this session. I deem it an honor to propose the vote of thanks. I thank our keynote speaker, Dr. Preethi Srinivasan, for sharing her valuable insights. I also thank our paper presenter, Ms. Snowlin. I thank our college principal, Dr. B. Uma Maheshwari, ma'am, for her constant support. Once again, our heartfelt thanks to Dr. Preethi Srinivasan, Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English, for providing various research opportunities to the research scholars and postgraduate students. I thank all the staff members and research scholars who are at this forum. Thank you all. We will meet again after a fortnight on 9th August 2024 with the topic Peace Dialogues Between Cultures and Groups. Thank you all.
Thank you. Please feel free to contact me if you have any more queries regarding Australian Aboriginal studies. I'm very disappointed that I didn't get any questions. So if you have any idea of researching into this, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Snowlin. That was as I said, a absolutely professional presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
Actually, Preethi, it was very informative. We were so engrossed in listening to you. So, we have several things actually to think of, like what exactly is the position of the Aborigines now, after maybe a couple of decades or something, after the treaty and all. Has it improved or is it?
Actually, in with regard to Australia, it is not so much the question of money money is available for these communities, but only thing is, as I told you, they are very remotely located. Okay, so imagine in Alice Springs, in a desert place, or my experience of reaching a community in a place called Sherburg. So I had to travel by bus to Mergon, and from Mergon, I have to go by road hiring a taxi. So this is how communities are in remote places, all right, and they have access to education, but one of the as in the case of even in Tamil Nadu, the problem in all these communities is domestic violence, alcoholism, and this is,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is the thing. So and very
Mm.
often the violence is black on black. See, earlier in the past, we could when the violence was white on black, you could, make a case for offense, right? But when offense by the other, by the racial other. But
Okay.
in this case, because of the wounded psyche, because of so much of harm that has been over generations and has been systemic, because of low self with of what do you say, erosion of culture. They've lost their root. They don't have roots. They have, because of
Mm.
their half caste,
That's
they
right.
have loss of language, loss of culture, loss of identity, loss of land. So
Mm.
many things have compounded their sense of self, have compounded this lack of sense of self. So
Mm.
this psychological empowerment is more important than material and physical, because there are dole systems, financial support, all that is there. But to empower these communities by these individuals making a choice to be empowered through education, making choices to come out of alcoholism, these are the issues of modern day Australia.
Okay. So they have achieved what they wanted, no? These colonizers, they wanted to divide the people. So they have
Mm.
created a kind of a rift, See, politically or something like they might have had a treaty or something between the whites and the blacks, but among themselves, there's a lot of rift, isn't it?
Yes, I've heard
As
that
a,
they pump money into communities and just let them, kill themselves
Mm.
with
yeah,
alcohol,
yeah. And drugs also maybe
drugs.
added to that. Yeah.
But
Okay.
we shouldn't
Mhm.
stereotype them that way. Also, that could be,
Okay.
very
Mhm.
detrimental to their
Yeah.
thing. But
Yeah.
these are the
Mm.
challenges that they are facing.
Mm. Okay. Mm. Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Thank you.
I
Thank you for
also
your interesting. Yes, Nolan.
found more of an observation between the two reconciliation movements that we saw today. The whites were both settlers in in South Africa and in Australia, but when the natives tackled the idea of peace and reconciliation, they didn't want to chase the white people out, and they
Yes.
mostly addressed both the whites and the blacks to integrate and to be reconciled.
Yeah. Because even the whites have been there for some generations, right? So where will they go? So the South African white is actually an outcast in Britain, is what I heard.
Even now in South Africa, it's all dominated by whites, no? I think
Whites, but
many people
the
are
South,
there living there.
yeah, the British person who from South Africa, he's not accepted on equal
Oh,
terms in
uh-huh.
British milieu in
Oh,
UK.
okay.
Uh,
Uh-huh. Quite
And
weird,
there
no?
were
This.
Dutch settlers as well.
mm, so that in betweenness, uh, I think Homi Baba talks about this, right? The in betweenness. Sara Soleri also about the interstitial spaces, in betweenness, liminality. All these are important terms, like to understand.
Mm.
So
Okay.
actually, they live in a liminal space,
Mm.
and that liminal space has to be made less toxic by making it a shared space.
Mm. Yeah. Ma'am is not there today. She's
Ma'am
not
has gone to
attended.
Kerala.
She's
Ma'am
not
has
there.
gone to Kerala.
Okay.
Professor also hasn't come, but I'm sure he looks like he sent a lot of number of students.
Okay.
Good attendance.
Fine. Fine.
It was a good session, but
Yes.
though there's silence reigning, I hope
Yeah.
it was beneficial to the students. What Said Ibrahima, Annie, Blessy, all of you.
Definitely, they would have taken something from that. Maybe they're not able to express. That's it. Something will
Mm,
get into their system. That's what I believe.
mm,
Maybe after a while, they'll be able to work on it.
yeah. Thank you, Vinita, for coming.